one of the studies I became interested in, Victor Hagani and James White, who are two hedge fund guys, wrote an interesting book called The Missing Billionaires. And they show that if the 1,000 wealthiest family in 1900 had invested sensibly, received reasonable returns, reproduced at the normal rate, and passed their wealth on to their children, that cohort alone should have generated 16,000 billionaires today, mathematically speaking. And yet we have nothing like that today. There are only 3,000 billionaires worldwide, let alone in the US, and that was only one cohort. There should have been generations of these cohorts creating massive amounts of wealth. And so whatever is happening, there is something happening now which is causing this tremendous wealth to slip away at unprecedented speed. Very few billionaires now can trace their wealth back past the 1980s, for example, and on a historic timeline, that's very short. However, one of the studies I reference in the book, which shows that an alternative is possible, is a study called Trajectories of Aristocratic Wealth. And that is a survey of 200 years of what is called probate data from the UK. Probate is the court adjudication process by which an inheritance is decided in public as to which heirs it will go to, who gets what. So you can actually track, and this is what the scholars have done, Bond and Morton, they track the trajectories of Britain's most prominent families over 200 years. And they find that they're able to separate out two classes within the aristocracy. So on the one hand, you have these great industrial fortunes that rise up around 1900 to explosive levels of wealth we've really never seen before. In America, these would be the equivalent of the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, these kind of families. They exist in Britain as well. And in Britain, because of the system there, they get granted peerages, which means they receive titles if they are seen to have made an exceptional contribution to the nation's economy or some other contribution. So they receive these titles like Baron and so forth. Those families disappear from history within a generation or two. They don't have the social technology. A different class of families are the older landed families. And these are the kind of 1,000-year families, the Grosvenors and other families. And what Bond and Morton discover, and they use the words like the tortoise to the hare, is that these families, though not comparable in terms of their massive wealth at first, they continued a pace over 200 years growing wealth. And the only things that set them back were wars, which proportionately killed aristocrats, like the First World War, and the incredibly punitive inheritance taxation regimes of the sort of 1930s. Now, it sort of sounds crass to say they grew their wealth. You know, I think viewing this in a very financialized way is kind of gross. But what it does imply, and I think this is the main thing, is that they were able to produce responsible stewards, serious, committed, intelligent men, generation after generation, in order to make that happen. So this didn't just imply one family getting obscenely wealthy. This actually implied a stability, an order, a rootedness, a predictability, long-term thinking, and applied children. So these alternatives do exist. In the book, I sort of break down three categories, and I devote a chapter to each one. The first is this question of child rearing, like what are the practices, the techniques, the approaches that you can and should adopt really from the beginning of a child's life. And I look at aristocratic families to see what they do. Not just aristocratic families, I should say. I mean, America has no shortage of storied and successful families as well. The Taft family and so forth, these families that really did generate. But I like the Boston Brahmins in particular, the Winthrops and the Adams family and so forth. Very, very impressive. So yes, the first category is child raising. The second category is the structure of the estate. And for me, this is like, if you go to a religious institution, you will actually get a rigorous religious institution, whether that's Protestant or Catholic or Orthodox, you will actually get, by and large, good advice on raising children. We know what it means to be a serious biblical household. That for me, the missing ingredient that most people are simply not even aware that they should be looking at is the structure of the estate. This is something that has radically changed in the last 150 years. What has happened was, before 150 years ago, really before the Second World War, an inheritance was typically a productive asset. It would be a farm or it would be an estate, but even the aristocratic estates were productive assets. They were property management services, essentially, which had to maintain productive agricultural holdings, perhaps mines, other things. And that meant you were giving someone luxury, yes, but you were giving someone a job as well. And they had to, if they wanted to maintain their inheritance, and they were very much expected societally, socially, at every level to maintain their family estate. I mean, it was their families. It bore their title. It held the graves of their ancestors in it. They would have to work at this productive asset. So duty and temptation or luxury perhaps came hand in hand. And so there was only so far you could stray from ultimately a hard day's work, or at least, a serious application of the mind before everything fell apart. And so everything was structurally oriented naturally. No one really considered this. It was just the way the economy ran. After the Second World War, you get an increasingly liquid economy, and it becomes very normal for families to sell what would have been in the past family businesses. You get businesses which are grown just to be sold, even on 5 or 10 year time horizons, for these massive liquidation events. And the rise of liquid fortunes is quite a novelty. That was available to very few people, historically speaking, even amongst the very wealthy. And so now what you typically see are parents really struggling with this question of, well, in liquid terms, I'm incredibly wealthy, and I'm simply aware that I haven't raised a child. You'd have to be a saint not to be tempted by a massive liquid event when you were very young. I mean, that is a potentially corrupting event. And so one of the things I look at in the book is the sort of subtle shift that has happened to where we've normalized inheritance in terms of massive liquid wealth, which I think is a very bad idea. And I think we need to explore ways to recapture binding this wealth and duty together. And I think that's very possible. And then the final thing is the intelligent initiation of children into the working life. I think that we do this. Some people do it well. Some people do it badly now. They've sort of been some families that should be thinking in dynastic terms have kind of internalized mass market dynamics, that they should be sending their children off to the other side of the country to go to a random college and then to work at a random firm for 10 years and prove themselves. And then I'm going to snap them back into the family business somehow, which is now in an area where they don't have any friends and they don't have a life and is in a different industry to the one they've been working in. So that is a more subtle art than most people realize as well. But those are the sort of three pillars, I think.